It is Friday, and we are working for Crusoe. Friday, January 31st, 2025. We're staying alive in 25. He's Sam Park in Los Angeles. I'm John Ramey in Reno, Nevada. We're going to talk about the Fed, always a show favorite. We will discuss the evolution in the conflict between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo in Central Africa. And we will also talk about this, what's the right adjective, Sam? The foreign aid freeze, feckless foreign aid freeze that the United States has.
I think there are many different adjectives we might employ to describe that here, but we'll get to those anon.
Yeah. So anyway, 90-day foreign aid freeze, because what does U.S. foreign aid do? How is that important? Who knows? Okay, we'll get there. We'll start with the Fed. Monetary policy, hot topic. The Fed met this week. Fed Chair Jerome Powell spoke to the media and the masses. This is reporting from CNBC. The Federal Reserve kept interest rates at the current target rate of 4.25% to 4.5% at the conclusion of its January meeting, but policymakers warned that inflation remains, quote, somewhat elevated. The pause comes after the central bank cut rates 3 consecutive times to end 2024. At his press conference, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell emphasized that the central bank is in no hurry to adjust its policy stance, particularly as the economy remains strong. Quote, the range of possibilities is very, very wide, Powell said. We don't know for how long or how much, what countries. We don't know about retaliation. We don't know how it's going to transmit through the economy to consumers. That really does remain to be seen. He's talking about tariffs.
Exactly.
He goes on to say the best we can do is what we've done, which is study up on this and look at the historical experience, read the literature, and think about the factors that might matter. And then we'll just have to see how it goes. Jerome Powell, a calm, steady mind in a time of chaos.
Right. So now I don't always watch the entirety of Chairman Powell's or any Fed chairman's remarks at the conclusion of the meeting of the Federal Open Market Committee because, I don't have any trouble sleeping as it is. But I wanted to watch this meeting's conference because it was, of course, the first one since President Trump took office. And so I wanted to see if there were going to be any kind of developments. I didn't think there would be any because even as Fed chairman go, Powell is very reserved and, as you mentioned, just calm, doesn't really go out on a limb very much.
It's what you want in a central banker.
Exactly. And, during the press conference portion of the event, the reporters did their dutiful best to try and draw him out into, some sort of remark that might be newsworthy. And if anything, he took a little bit extra care to not be drawn into such activity. So, it was a non-eventful press conference. We actually got additional inflation data today, which I'm sure that the Federal Reserve had been privy to, or at least had sort of analogous data that they were looking at, that the monthly inflation rate was 2.8%, which is very much in line with both what analysts had expected and what Powell was saying yesterday, right? That's higher than they would like it to be. And so there's no real, as he says, they're not in any hurry to cut rates or move rates in either direction at this point. And so we'll have to see how that goes in the future. One thing I did find interesting, though, was that President Trump didn't say anything, or at least if he did, it wasn't reported, right? Whereas, as we will recall, addressing the Davos World Economic Forum last week, he said that he would demand, which was the word he used, was demand that interest rates be lowered.
He's also said, since he took office, that he knows more about interest rates than the Fed.
I think he actually said that before while he was running for president last year. Right?
Yeah, he's also said that too. Yeah, he said from the Oval Office though in week one.
And so, but that doesn't matter what he knows about it. I think he's wrong about that, by the way, but he doesn't have a role
Really?
in setting this policy. And so, uh, he can say as much as he wants, but he didn't
That
condemn
is
the
odd.
Fed, yeah, for not lowering interest rates. So I thought that was remarkable. And so another one of our dogs that don't bark, where we're going to have a whole kennel of these things by the time we're through here, John.
Now, Sam, is it
Uh,
possible he said something on social media browbeating the Fed's decision and we just missed it?
oh, it's very possible,
Totally
right?
possible,
But
right?
I think that we probably would have heard about it.
Yeah.
But we'll see how it plays out. That the White House insists that the plans for tariffs are going forward. That is, they will begin tomorrow on Canada and Mexico, possibly China. But Canada and Mexico are the countries that people seem to be focusing on right now. There's a lot of conflicting reports. The Wall Street Journal reported today that Trump's economic team are looking for off ramps in this sort of conversation that might be in the offing with Canada and Mexico. And Trump mentioned last night that the tariffs might not affect oil imports and exports from Canada and Mexico, right? Which would make sense, right? If there's one thing that Trump doesn't want, it's higher gasoline prices. And but if you're excluding oil and from Canada and Mexico trade, that makes the tariffs less effective, right? You're taking a whole big chunk of economic activity off the table. So then what are we doing here, right? But as of right now, as far as I know, there's no actual detail about what the tariffs might or might not include if they go ahead tomorrow as planned. So we're going to have to return to that issue uh, in future, probably, hopefully next week, uh, unless Trump means to just sort of, wave tariffs around for the next 4 years, which he very well might do, by the way.
Oh, he would never
Uh,
do that, Sam.
oh, well, okay, well, if you say so. But to return to Chairman Powell, one thing he did say that I found interesting, because as he habitually says, and every Fed chairman would say, right, is it's not my place to comment on, whatever the president or any elected official says, either positively or negatively. That's just outside of my sort of bailiwick, right? And that's just boilerplate Federal Reserve language. He did, however, say towards the end, like I think it was the last question he took, that he thought it would be sensible for Congress to pass some sort of legislation about regulation of cryptocurrency. Right? He didn't say what he thought that regulation should be at all. Right? He didn't, but just the idea
Maybe
that
it
he was,
just ought to exist.
yeah, there should be some regulatory framework, I think is the point he was trying to make, right? Just to introduce some sort of certainty into the crypto market. And I thought for him, that was actually kind of going out on a limb there, right? I agree with him, by the way. But I just found it remarkable that he would actually go that far with it. And so, to his credit, now I, generally have a positive feeling about Chairman Powell. Uh, and, he's certainly done some things that I thought were mistakes here and there. He also mentioned, by the way, that, and I'd forgotten about this, but every 5 years, the Federal Reserve does a monetary policy 5-year review, right? It's sort of the opposite of the Chinese Communist Party 5-year plan, where they tell you what they're going to do, right? And the Fed looks backward at what they've done over the past 5 years. And so, sort of, much like the Chinese Communist Party, engages in self-criticism and decides what they might have done better. And so that'll be something to look forward to for the rest of this year. Mind you, to go back to his comments about cryptocurrency, he might feel, you know what, I've only got another year and a half left in my term, right? And I'm almost certainly not going to get renominated. So, if I'm going to engage in any sort of unusual commentary, he might feel like he's got more of a free hand going forward. We'll see. Not a lot, mind you. I don't think he's going to suddenly start wagging his finger at anybody, but we'll see how
Be
that
great
goes
if
for
he
the
did.
next year. Yeah, it would be.
All right, from the amusing and the lighthearted to the terrible, the conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda in the heart of Africa. We'll put the map up. Let's just define some terms here. Rwanda, tiny country, 13.5 million people, 129th in GDP. The Democratic Republic of Congo, huge country, 111 million people, 87th in GDP. You can see the comparison in geographical size on that map. UPI, United Press International, which still exists, Sam. Didn't
Wow,
actually.
really?
Yeah, this is a UPI story. Today, the Democratic Republic of Congo's foreign minister on Friday today accused Rwanda of illegally occupying part of its territory after the M23 rebel group captured the eastern Congolese city of Goma. Foreign Minister Therese Kayokamba Wagner made the claim to the BBC, saying that she believed Rwanda was attempting to orchestrate a regime change in the Democratic Republic of Congo, as international leaders had failed to hold Rwandan President Paul Kagame, who we'd like to welcome back to the podcast, accountable for violations of international law. M23's advances have primarily come in the Congo province of South, how are we saying that, Sam?
Kivu.
Kivu, which shares a border to the east with both Burundi and Rwanda. You want to zoom out on this, Sam?
Well, I mean, this is a continuation of a story that's been really happening for decades. We talked last year on the 30th anniversary of the genocide in Rwanda about these issues in some small level of detail. But basically, ever since the genocide, there's been trouble between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, also including other countries, including Uganda, Burundi, and others in what's called the Great Lakes region of Africa.
African Great Lakes.
That's right. And Kagame, as we mentioned last year, because the genocide in Rwanda was such a profoundly humiliating experience for the international, that is the Western-led international community. And Kagame was the one who put a stop to it. He's basically been getting a pass from the international community ever since for 30 years, right? Mind you, the Rwandan genocide was in 1994. And Kagame has been the so-called elected president of Rwanda ever since then. And he's been pushing the sort of limits of the patience of the international community ever since. And it seems like it might have run out. We'll have to see how this works out. I, in fact, saw the Congolese foreign minister on the PBS NewsHour last night. It's a great segment because she's not the foreign minister for nothing. I can tell you that right now. She was just very direct and clear about exactly what's going on.
You're talking about Foreign Minister Wagner.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And she did a terrific job and managed to boil down this very complex and long-standing situation into like a 6-minute interview. And so I have to applaud her for that. But she touched on all these aspects, and she mentioned a report that came out about a month ago from a UN-appointed panel of experts that is examining this whole recent spate of events, which has been unfolding for a couple months already. And I actually downloaded that report today. I haven't read it. It's 160 pages, so we'll have
You'll
to
have
see
it for next week.
Yeah, maybe. But one of the things that she mentioned was that the reason that, well, one of many reasons actually that Rwanda is doing this, and which, by the way, they're not just backing M23, the rebel group. They've got thousands of their own soldiers inside of Congo right now, which they did not. Kagame denies this, right? But it's been independently confirmed over and over and over again. The only person who doesn't admit that this is happening is Paul Kagame, and one of the reasons he's doing this is because of very lucrative mining concessions in that particular part of the DRC. And these mines produce things like gold and coltan, which goes into electric batteries. And the UN report mentions that in the past month or so, or that is in the month leading up to their that they looked at, 150 metric tons of coltan were smuggled out of Congo into Rwanda and then listed as Rwandan mineral exports on global markets. And one thing that I kind of wish some news outlet would report very explicitly is who's buying them. Because I mean, I think we all know the answer is basically everybody, right? I don't mean to, we should be pointing our fingers at this or that, entity or country, because it is, these are global mineral markets, right? China's buying them, we're buying them, they're probably in your phone, okay, or the next phone you buy. But that to me is really the most important part of this story, is that war crimes are being committed right now so that people can sell rocks, right? And we're all buying them. And so that's what the foreign minister, Madame Wagner, was saying, right, is that they want three things. They want all Rwandan troops to be withdrawn from the DRC. They want a moratorium on mineral exports from Rwanda until they withdraw their troops at a minimum, right? And they want Rwanda to no longer be allowed to provide troops for peacekeeping forces anywhere else, which is one thing that Rwanda has been very good about doing ever since the genocide. And it's part of the way that Kagame keeps his sort of good standing with the
brand
international
laundering.
community. Yeah, right. It's like, look at me, I'm providing peacekeeping forces, right? The other thing that I think is underexamined is that Kagame receives billions of dollars a year in foreign assistance from Western countries. He is a client, his state is a client state of the West. And I think, as we mentioned in our episode last year, part of the reason for that is just because he is a stable country, right? He's a dictator, and he's running a very sophisticated surveillance police state, right? But having a stable country in Central Africa is obviously something that the people in the West would like to see. But
but he should stop destabilizing his neighbor.
Yes, exactly, right? And so that's why patience might be running out for him. Now, $1 billion here, $1 billion there, that's, in terms of international finance, that's not a lot of money. But as you mentioned, John, Rwanda's a very small country. A few $1 billion in Rwanda, that goes
a long way.
Right? And so if some sort of, honestly, I think the most important thing that Madame Wagner asked for is the moratorium on mineral exports, right? If that can't get done, then I don't see what else.
It's status quo. Right.
But she also mentioned that every member of the UN Security Council has condemned Rwanda for its involvement in Eastern Congo right now. So this is refreshingly not one of the issues where it's the West versus the rest, right? Everybody understands that this is a problem and needs to be have a stop put to it.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned that M23's advances were, quote, heightening the threat of a regional war. That was earlier this month. Guterres demanded M23, quote, immediately cease its offensive, withdraw from all occupied areas. This week, the United States backed Guterres' message calling for an immediate ceasefire. Secretary of State Marco Rubio called the current situation, quote, deeply troubling. adding that he'd
Well, nothing
spoken
gets by
Tuesday.
him.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Marco. Thanks. And he called Rwandan President Paul Kagame Tuesday. That again is from United Press International, which still does report from Africa and other smaller niche markets.
Good for them.
Yeah. It's crazy. This is like a 30-year story in a weird way.
Yeah, and now there has been some speculation that Kagame sort of views Donald Trump in kind of the same way I do, right? In that he only really cares about the northwestern quadrant of the globe that the United States inhabits, right? And he's just willing to, turn his back on the entire rest of the world. And so he's doing this now because he doesn't think anybody's going to stop him. And it's important that he be proved wrong in that. I'm not certain that he will, but
So you're saying Kagame is just like Central Africa? I'm going to run it. Stop
well,
me.
I don't know about, I'll at least project as much power as I can.
I'll
because
be
I
a power player here.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's going to stand in my way. And now I don't know if that's true or not, but it would, at least all the behaviors he's engaging in right now would make sense if he did view things that way. Right? He doesn't seem to think that anybody's going to stand in his way. In other words, like he tried to do the same thing back in 2012, and it was put a stop to by the international community. Right? They leveled sanctions upon him, and he withdrew his forces from the exact same region of Congo that he's occupying right now. What changed his mind? Right? What made him suddenly say, "Oh, I should do that again"? Right? There must have been something, and so
Possibly the long and public erosion of the international rules-based
yes,
order.
exactly. Right? Which, by the way, right, never was really intended to cover the African continent to begin with, and has never done a good job of securing the interests of people on that continent. And I think that's one of the sort of very much larger issues that are in play here, is that
Never again, except for maybe in Rwanda.
that's right, or anywhere, right? I mean, there's things happen in Africa all the time that's just like, oh, well, we couldn't have done anything about this because we never intended to, right? And I think, if things keep going in this fashion, then I think the entire idea of the rules-based international order will just be put under greater and greater strain, which is, it's already not doing very well. But, people in that part of the world will say over and over again, oh, well, somebody invades Ukraine, suddenly it's the biggest thing in the world, right? Hamas attacks Israel, biggest thing in the world. Everybody has to do, has to jump up and down and say what they think about it. Right? Things like this happen in Africa all the time. The world's greatest humanitarian catastrophe has been unfolding in Sudan for almost 3 years now, and nobody's done anything about it. And it's just like, well, do people care? Right? They can say they do, but meanwhile, the Trump administration is trying to stop almost all foreign aid.
Oh, that dovetails nicely into our next segment.
I thought so.
Yeah.
But, and so, people can be forgiven if, in some ways, they might find it refreshing, right? To say, look, the United States just admitted it. They don't actually care.
Right. We're not going to trifle with a fig leaf.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
CNN reporting on the foreign assistance freeze. The United States has frozen foreign assistance, which is an insane thing to say. CNN reporting the extent of the impacts of the Trump administration's sudden 90-day freeze of almost all foreign aid is still unclear almost a week on, as officials and aid workers overseas try to make sense of which activities must be suspended. The suspension of foreign aid was outlined in a diplomatic cable from Secretary of State Marco Rubio last Friday, a week ago today. In addition to widespread confusion around ongoing aid projects, the suspension means some aid contractors are not being paid for contracts and work they have already completed, one aid industry source told CNN, speaking anonymously for fear of retribution. Contractors working with USAID, many of them US-based companies and small businesses, often front the money for aid work and then submit invoices and get reimbursed later. So Donald Trump's administration is stiffing aid workers, American aid workers, just like he stiffs people who have built buildings for him.
That's right. And not to mention,
Shocking.
people all over the world who rely on foreign assistance. Right. One of the programs that's been paused here, it's what's called PEPFAR, which stands for the Presidential Emergency Program for AIDS Relief. And much as I hold George W. Bush in a great deal of disdain, this is
work on AIDS in Africa. Unbelievable.
This is one of the unmitigated triumphs of his presidency. It's saved millions of lives. And Donald Trump wants to put a stop to this, or at least pause it for 90 days at a minimum. And I can't stress how troubling I think this is. This is one of the ways that that the United States does earn goodwill around the world. And if we're suddenly going to stop doing, again, it's sort of just like taking off the mask, right? If people just say, well, people, the United States has decided they don't care. Other countries are going to gain the influence that we shirk. And they're doing it now. China we talked last year about China opening a big port in Peru, right? China and Russia are getting involved in different countries in Africa. They show up, okay? They might have their own interests that they're pursuing, and they're make no bones about it. But if they're helping other countries will be more grateful to them than they are to us. And again, if Trump only cares about the Northwestern Quadrant, then he doesn't see that as a problem. But I think quite a lot of people, not just myself, would disagree with him about that.
Again, it's just it's hard to contextualize things that are so frankly shocking. And I do recall this from the first Trump administration, right? Like the suspension of almost all U.S. foreign aid. Like that's a huge undertaking for all of humanity, and we're just going to stop it for 90 days. Yeah. Like it's irresponsible. It's just irresponsible. I want to wag my finger at these people.
Well, I mean, it is, but I mean, when Trump talked about America first, which he's said for many years, right? This is an isolationist slogan, right? And so if he's doing it, nobody should be surprised, right? And this is one of many instances where there are going to be people who say, oh, well, nobody voted for this. They just wanted to bring down prices. I'm like, okay, I'm sorry. People did vote for it, right? He said he was going to do this. And if you thought he didn't mean it, well, I don't know what to say to you. And all of the things he's done domestically, which we don't talk about on this podcast, right? They're all in the same bucket, right? He did say he was going to do these things. And if you didn't think he was going to, I don't know what I can say.
On Tuesday, Secretary of State Rubio issued a temporary waiver for existing, quote, life-saving humanitarian assistance programs to include core life-saving medicine, medical services, food shelter, and subsistence assistance, as well as supplies and reasonable administrative costs, end of quote. But it's not clear exactly.
No, but who's covered under that and who isn't? Yeah. And this is another thing that I think is ironic, let's say. I don't want to say funny because it's not at all funny, right? But if you're issuing these blanket sort of suspensions and or bans, right? And then you say, oh, well, there'll be stuff that isn't covered by them. You're making this process much less efficient, right? You're making all the possible recipients of these programs have to sort of lobby you, right? And say, okay, so what do we got now? What resources can we still get, right? And then you have to go through all of them and decide, right? This is not an efficient way to run a government. right? You make the laws and you obey the laws, and then it's just easier that way.
I don't have anything more to add on this other than it's irresponsible and it's killing people.
Yeah. Well, okay. Now there's some good news stories out there too. There's hostages being released by Hamas in Gaza, and that appears to be going well for the moment. So that's something that we'll be able to keep an eye on going forward. We'll have to see if these tariffs come into effect tomorrow or not. I wouldn't put money on it either way, honestly. But if they do, then we'll have plenty to talk about in reference to that next week. And at some point we'll want to talk about the upcoming election in Germany, but that'll probably wait a few weeks because that won't be until the end of next month. But that's certainly heating up as well. I would like to keep an eye on Rwanda and the DRC, just because it could be catastrophic. Now, M23 says that they plan to march all the way to Kinshasa, right? Which now I've never been to Africa. I've never been in the military. They're not going to do that. Okay, that's like 1,000 miles. They get wiped out. But that doesn't mean that the situation there isn't potentially catastrophic for the entire region.
On that light note, we will bid you adieu. Have a great weekend. He's Sam Park. I'm John Ramey. Peace.
Thanks, everyone.